Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Student Scholarship Week panel, Public History in Practice. This is a panel I have run for Student Scholarship Week for several years, and as I get a chance to reflect on the work of our students each year at this time, I never cease to be amazed at what our Hawks are capable of. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be posted to the Department of History and Anthropology YouTube channel, barring any technical issues. So if you don't know me, I am Melissa Ziobro of the Department of History and Anthropology, and I'm the point of contact for our department's public history minor. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, what is public history? If you're not in our department, this might not be a term you're familiar with. Students sometimes think it has to do with public policy. The National Council on Public History says, public history describes the many and diverse ways in which history is put to work in the world. In this sense, it is history that is applied to real world issues. In fact, applied history was a term used synonymously and interchangeably with public history for a number of years. The public history minor here at Monmouth consists of 15 credits. Required courses are HS 212, Intro to Public History, HS 312, which is our oral history course, and also HS 317, Museums and Archives Management Basics. Students also select 6 credits from the list that includes things like archaeology and historic preservation. So who is taking these classes? Well, a lot of Department of History and Anthropology students intend to teach at the K-12 level, and anecdotally, we find our alumni say that these classes really prepare them to provide project-based learning opportunities in their own classroom. But these classes are especially critical to our students who want to go out and work as public historians at public history sites, as cultural resource managers, preservationists, archivists, curators, oral historians, historic site interpreters, corporate researchers, and more. A minor in public history gives these students some much needed preparation to do history outside the classroom and really helps prepare them for life after Monmouth. And then, of course, we have some students who take these classes just for fun. Some of our presenters today are public history minors and some are not. So in all of the public history classes that I have mentioned, the students do meaty projects of some sort, something that's going to give them real world experience. And that's what you're going to hear about today. I have here 4 students who will discuss public history projects that are not only preparing them for life after Monmouth, but also preserving and disseminating untold stories and benefiting significant community partners, such as the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey, the Asbury Park Historical Society and Museum, and more. So Jillian is going to discuss her Urban Coast Institute funded work, conducting interviews about life in Asbury Park, New Jersey, to include the recent wrenching experience of the COVID-19 pandemic. That is part of our department's Paradoxical Parade Asbury Park project. Matthew will discuss his internship with the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey, where he is processing interviews for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. Samantha will discuss the Julian Abell project, the capstone project of Monmouth's Fall 2020 Museums and Archives class. This digital humanities project shines light on the life and work of pioneering African-American architect Julian Abell, who is largely responsible for Monmouth's own Great Hall. And Rowan will discuss the intersection of historic preservation and archives based on a poster recently included at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference annual meeting, Suffrage Legacies, Civil Rights, Political Activism, and Archives. So again, if you could all just double check that you are muted, that would be very helpful. Each of the students will speak for roughly 5 to 7 minutes, and then we will have time for Q&A from the audience. Also, just a note that links for information, more information on all of these projects have been placed in the chat for you if you would like to take a look after. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to Jillian first.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jillian Dimitriou. Like Professor Ziobro said, I'm a history major with minors in public history and English. So I'm in all of Professor Ziobro's classes, and that's kind of how I got introduced to be on this project. I thought I'd just talk about a little about the project as a whole, and then go into my specific role. The overall project is called Paradoxical Parade, an African-American oral history and mapping project of Asbury Park. And its directors are Dr. Williams, Professor Ziobro, and Dr. Fuad. So I think it's in our mission statement, but it's basically a multi-year initiative that explores the largely untold experience of African Americans in Asbury Park, New Jersey, from its founding in 1870 to current day. And the overall hope is to learn, obviously, but by examining the histories of African Americans in Asbury Park specifically, it'll provide a window to the greater African American experience of throughout American history as a whole. So the archival research is led by Dr. Williams. Professor Ziobro oversees the oral history collecting portion of this project, which is what I'm a part of. And then Dr. Fuad, with his student help, have been creating GIS maps that provide a visualization of the COVID-19 health statistics and their impact on African Americans in Asbury Park. And then eventually, once the project is over and has moved, not over, but has developed a little bit more, our findings will be available on a website with interactive maps, access to all of these interviews that we've been doing. So hopefully sometime soon, those will be up and running and everybody can look at them. But for right now, if you want more information than what I provide, there is a library guide on our library's website, and Dr. Williams, I believe, runs our Instagram page, Paradoxical-Paradise 2021. I can put it in the chat later if you want to follow it. She posts pictures that either she takes and pictures that she's found in archives, so it's really cool. But enough about the project as a whole. So Professor Ziobro reached out to me personally to work on this project after I took her oral history class as an independent study in fall of 2020. And it's just been a really great experience since then. There's a lot that goes into preparing for an oral history interview on the part of the interviewer. So basically our job is to make the narrator or the interviewee feel completely comfortable, no pressure or anything, nothing like that. So I have personally done 3 interviews so far with Asbury Park Councilwoman and Director of the Bruce Springsteen Archives at school, Eileen Chapman, the Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club of Monmouth County, Douglas Eagles, and the Director of the Asbury Park Chamber of Commerce, Sylvia. And in their individual interviews, they all discussed how the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has affected them personally. But since they all happen to be in positions of power and influence within the community of Asbury Park, they also got to discuss how they have been able to influence policy in Ms. Chapman's case, over how Asbury Park handled the pandemic, and then in Mr. Eagle's case, he talked about how he has been able to provide school supplies for a lot of the children throughout Asbury Park, not just the people who attend the Boys and Girls Club. And he also talked about how they have been providing meals for children who would get it at school, but since schools are closed or not in session, they might not be able to get that same access to food. And then in Miss Sylvia's interview, she discussed how, as her role as the director of the Chamber of Commerce, has been able to stimulate businesses throughout Asbury Park, which is a very big role in their downtown area. So it was just overall, they've all played a part in kind of uplifting Asbury during this troubling time for everyone. So it was very interesting and a great experience to get to listen to these people and listen to their individual experiences. I have 2 more interviews scheduled for after finals because there's a lot of stuff to do right now, but hopefully we can gather a bunch of people's stories, and yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jillian. I'm sure our audience has some questions for you, but we will save those to the end. I would just note that Jillian is doing a tremendous job. She's actually one of 3 students that we have working on this right now, documenting this exceedingly difficult time in people's lives. So thank you, Jillian. All right, next up, we have Matthew talking about his oral history work for the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey.
Hi, everyone. As Professor Yoba just said, my name is Matt Berger, and I'm a senior history major with the plans of pursuing teaching in the future. So this semester, I've been working with the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey. And throughout the semester, I've been working as part of the internship program where I'm processing the interviews conducted by Carol Fowler, who's also in the chat right now. She's interviewed local New Jersey veterans and has compiled the interviews as part of the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. So I've been working closely with her, who has provided me with the needed materials for the summaries, including the videos and any other materials such as photos, videos, personal memoirs. So I review all this and then compile an oral summary of this. Some of the materials, like I said, were photos and personal memoirs, and this just allows a real in-depth feeling of learning the stories of these veterans. So once I finish reviewing all this material, I conduct a written summary, and then I submit it to Carol for the editorial process, and then it is uploaded to the website of Library of History, which I can show you in 1 second. Can everybody see that? Yeah, so this is our main website, and it's broken down into each of the different wars that the U.S. has been involved in. So as you can see, there's different categories for different veterans. And some of the latest ones that I've worked on have been World War II veterans. And this is one of them, actually. So attached would be the interview, which Carol conducted, and then the summary that I wrote. And it just gives an in-depth look into this veteran's military career, his personal life, before and after enlisting, and then some of the photos that were provided by the veteran. So this was a ship that this veteran was particularly serving on, a memorable quote that he gave throughout the interview. And yeah, it just gives a little insight into his life and his time in the service. Just another example was this veteran, Claude V. Allen. And yeah, just, more personal pictures of him, his time in the service. Yeah, so just explores his life and his career. And how do I stop sharing my screen? So yeah, as I mentioned before, I've really enjoyed my time and experience working with the museum and getting this unique experience to interact and to be able to preserve these oral histories that have been given to us by the veterans. It's been a huge part in preserving our way of history. And one of my favorite moments thus far was reading the personal memoir. I think it was Claude who provided that. And just the amount of detail and just the way he was able to describe his story and his experience was extremely moving to me. And it allowed me to form a real connection with him, I felt, as I was writing, which helped me to, provide a good, adequate summary of his life and his service. Yes, that's pretty much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. So while Jillian and her fellow students are actually conducting interviews, Matt is taking these interviews that have been conducted by Carol and others at the National Guard Militia Museum and processing them, right? It's one thing to record the stories, but what we find is that researchers often don't have the time to sit and listen to hours and hours and hours of interviews. So a lot of time they'd like to read a summary, right? Know what they're getting into, decide if they need to access the entire file for their research. But either transcribing the interviews or summarize them is a really time-consuming process. And so, interns like Matt are doing a tremendous service for the National Guard Militia Museum of New Jersey, for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, and for the wider community who can now enjoy the work that Matt and others have done. So thank you, Matt. And I see Sergeant Walker and Carol Fowler are on the Zoom. So I want to thank you both for providing such wonderful opportunities for our students. Okay, so save your questions for Matt for the end, because we have Samantha now, who is going to tell us about the Julian Abell project.
Hi, like Professor Zioro mentioned, my name is Samantha. I'm a sophomore here. I have a major in English, and I'm working towards a major in English and a minor in anthropology. I'm one of the people that the professor mentioned that doesn't need to take these classes, but I did because it was fun. I took archives and museum management, and I had a great time compiling our capstone project, the Julian Abell website, through by looking through library resources and doing interviews and generally reading up on our beautiful campus and the architect who created it. So I have a prepared speech. I'm less off the cuff, but so who designed Buckingham Palace? John Nash. Who made the plans for Versailles? André Lenoche. Who is the architect for our own beautiful Great Hall? Up until recently, the answer was obscure and obtuse. Most people, if they thought about it at all, would simply point towards the Trumbauer architecture firm. But if you look a little bit more closely, you will find that our campus's signature building can largely be attributed to the creative mind of one Julian Abell, a pioneering African-American architect. To fully understand Abell's impact and the impact of his work on our campus, a large portion of our fall 2020 class, Archives and Museum Management, was spent on researching both the architect and his creation. Lost my place. There it is. Through this extensive research in books, newspapers, archives, and even an interview with Abell's biographer, our class was not only learned about the extensive history of Shadow Lawn's property and its several eccentric owners, but also Abell's personal history. The building as it currently stands is a recreation because the original property burned down. And this recreation was largely created by Abell and was commissioned by the Parson family as they were living in Paris after the original structure burned down. Historians believe that Abell drew the plans for the building while working for his long-term employer and friend, Horace Trumbauer. Abell's name was never formally signed to the project, and it is believed that he never even visited the site after the project was finished. While it was not totally unusual for plans to be marked only with the firm's name and not the individual architect, there are compounding factors that make these details significant. The biggest reason why Abell was not given credit and never visited the property was that we now know as the Great Hall at Shadow Lawn, may be because he was African American. Abell was at his prime in a time when segregation persisted and racism ran rampant. Because of this institutionalized and accepted discriminatory attitude, Abell was often kind of a secret. He was a sort of genius behind the curtain at the Trumbauer firm, and due to prevailing racial attitudes, it seems that it was easier to keep him that way at the time. Our project primarily focuses on bringing history back into focus as we examine his wonderful creations not only on our campus, but all over the country. We feel that, that even though by all accounts Abell was a very private and humble man who preferred his art to speak for him instead of his race or his personal life, he absolutely deserves recognition. Before beginning this project, I thought of the Great Hall as just a very pretty building that existed on the campus where I go to school. I can now see it for the beautiful, intricate, and heartwarming history it contains, and for the brilliant mind whose name was almost lost in history. I encourage you to all peruse our website and re-examine Abell's impact by seeing the Great Hall in a new light, as all of us in the class have learned to. Personally, I worked the most on the history of the Great Hall and its past owners, while my fellow students, my peers, worked more on Abell's history, so I will be able to answer more questions about the owners than about Abell, but I am fairly well versed. And now we're going to take a look at the website.
Yes, you want me to pull that up, Samantha?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
We have a beautiful map. It's very cool.
Samantha is an incredibly talented researcher and writer. She really got in there in the newspaper archives and did a tremendous job. Samantha, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So this is our website, and we kept saying last semester, when people think of the Great Hall, we don't want them to say, oh, do you know it was Annie? In fact, I was at the dentist on Monday, and the dentist was talking about, I told Dr. Dorsa this, oh, you teach at Monmouth? Did you know that Annie was filmed there? And I said, did you know that pioneering African-American architect Julian Abell designed the building? Like, that's what we want people to think of at first, even though we all love Annie. So this is the Julian Abell project, which we created, and then we were really fortunate. It got some coverage in the Asbury Park press and different media, which is hopefully helping to spread the word about the Great Hall's true claim to fame, if you will. So the link to our LibGuide is in the chat, as we noted. You can see a number of different tabs here. This is Mr. Abell himself. So we've got an overview, we have, and this is all created by the students, researched and written by the students. We did put ourselves through peer review also, dealing with Abell's biographer and some other architectural and New Jersey historians. You can see here's Evan's kind of biographical essay on Mr. Abell. Here is Samantha's essay about the history of the property and its previous owners. We've got a photo album and a timeline. I won't put you through every tab, but this one is important. I think Dr. Fuad is here. He was kind enough to create a map for us. So this is an interactive map where you can see the many different buildings that Abell and the Trumbauer firm have their stamp on along the East Coast. Our interview, you can read the transcript and actually watch the interview we did with Abell's biographer, Drex Spurlock Wilson. So the students did a tremendous job, and I hope if you haven't seen this already, you will get a chance to do that after today's session. So thanks, Samantha, and we'll save questions for you because we have one more presenter. We are going to hear from Rowan about her recent poster, which was included at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference this year.
Hello everyone, so as Professor Ziobro said, my name is Rowan. I'm a junior here at Monmouth University, and my major is, I'm in the 5-year program for special education. So I have been taking Dr. Ziobro's classes for like every year basically for my history major, part of my education. So for my project, I was researching lost sites for our history and heritage site class, and I had never been introduced to preservation before, or what preservation meant on like the historical sense of preserving historical sites. And the site that I was researching was the lost site of Johannes Herrenberg's revolutionary home. So in October of 1777, this home was in the Hudson Valley, and this was in the midst of the Revolutionary War, and they had a bunch of documents that they needed to save and protect during battle. So they sent it over to the Herrenberg's home, and this was one of the most like significant parts of this house's history, because the day after the documents were saved, the town that they were originally in was completely burnt down. But that's not the only significant part of this historical home. It was also the home of Sojourner Truth. So the Herrenberg family were slave owners, and when we're talking about history, we usually try to stick to the narrative that shows our glory, not usually the narrative that gives us a full view of what was happening during this time period. So I thought it was it was amazing to see that this home was not only significant in the sense that it brought America glory, but it also had a side to it that isn't really spoken about, and it was the home for Sojourner Truth, who was a wonderful advocate for not only civil rights but also women's rights and temperance. So I felt like when I'm trying to preserve or interpret a site, I wanted to try to get the full view of what this historical site meant. This site was the federal government's Historic American Building Service, also known as HABS, tried to preserve this site twice, so in 1922 and then in 1933, but their intention was to preserve the site in the sense of that this was a American Revolutionary home, and its purpose was it saved these historical documents, not the fact that it was the home of Sojourner Truth, who was raised as a slave on this plantation, and her legacy as a free woman afterwards. So that's what I wanted to focus in on this site. I wanted to make sure that the site was recognized not only for its glory during the American Revolution, but also the fact that it was a plantation for slave owners, for slaves, and one of the slaves who lived on this plantation was Sojourner Truth, and her legacy and what it meant and her impact on the American society. This site now is completely demolished. They had taken a few pieces of the house and put it in a museum in Delaware, but other than that, the site doesn't have much recognition. And the state that it's in is completely unsavable. So I just wanted to shed some light on this site and why it was so significant to be preserved and why I believe that it should have been preserved. And then I could show you the poster project that I did. Never mind. Dr. Ziobo, can you show it for me, please?
Yes, I can, absolutely. So the link to the Marek poster session, this session was awesome because it's free to everyone, regardless of if you registered for the conference or not. So I put the poster session playlist in the chat if anyone wants to go look. This is just a quick screen grab of Rowan's poster. She was actually one of 8 students who had their work accepted. Over 700 people thus far have accessed the poster session playlist, with an average of 60 people viewing each poster. So it's incredible that our students are being recognized as scholars and having this tremendous reach, right? Really having the power to share their work with people. And just, of course, making Monmouth so proud, right? Okay, that brings us to the end of the student presentations. What do you think? Are you all okay to answer some questions? Yes, you are. You all handle questions wonderfully. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, you have the ability to do that. Or if you'd like to type a question in the chat, I'd be happy to read that for you. Anyone? I know sometimes it takes a minute to find that unmute button. Anybody? Yes, Dr. Blumel.
Hi, great presentations, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm always interested in parallels and differences between student experiences. Did you know what the other members of this presentation panel were doing? Have you encountered each other in class? Did you keep tabs on each other? Or are these completely independent projects?
They're mostly independent. When of course we got the emails from Professor Ziobo about what we would be doing and the lineup for today, I looked into the other members of the project, and I know Rowan from the honor school. But other than that, it's sort of all coincidental, I guess. But you all did great.
I was wondering, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead. The rest of you, I guess, wanted to answer that question. Go ahead, answer the question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, for the most part, we all did our things individually, but Rowan and Samantha, I was in those classes with them with the Julian Abell project, so I knew what was going on, but not to the extent. So, if that makes sense.
So there's no kind of informal or formal workshopping. You're really just kind of, okay.
each of the I kind of selected one student to represent each project, right? So there were 8 students who did posters with Rowan, but I tapped Rowan to represent them. There were probably 12 or 13 students on the Julian Abell project with Samantha. I just tapped her. So these are all different courses and projects that we've got going on under the public history minor. And the students are just kind of, they might see each other overlapping from project to project, but they're each representing one project here.
So my question is sort of a broader question, and I was wondering how you think we might incorporate public history as a discipline into more of our disciplines. And I say that because as a K through 12 student, I always found the history of dead kings and queens to be rather dry. And then when I got to graduate school, it wasn't until graduate school that I worked with somebody who was a sociologist and realized that public history really is the sociology of the past and connected to it in a very different way. And I was just wondering, how do you see encouraging people to really love history the way that you're, I mean, you obviously are very passionate about them, and Samantha, you're taking this course as an elective, and and I know some of you because you're fabulous students. I mean, all of you are fabulous students. I know some of you through the honor school. So I'm just wondering, is there anything that you can share with people outside of this arena and the academy to sort of get them to love history the way that you become passionate about it through your studies now of public history? How do you take this outside of the academy and let us all learn from public history?
Go ahead, Samantha, you can unmute.
Oh, okay. I think the way that I would encourage, I don't know about in schools because that's not my area of knowledge, but I'd say with public history sites like the Great Hall, I think we should encourage more inclusion of public history in the stories we tell about the Great Hall. So maybe like talk about it more and say, did you know about Julian Abell? You've got to include the history and include the stories when you're talking about things that exist in our modern life to sort of link it back to the past. So if you're doing a Monmouth tour, maybe you could say this movie, this building featured in the movie Annie, but also it was built by like forward-thinking African-American architect Julian Abell in the 1920s. You can weave the history into your daily life by incorporating it in the stories we tell.
Thanks.
Any of the other students want to weigh in on that one?
I apologize for the noise in the background. There's somebody doing their lawn. But as a future educator, this is a topic that's really concerning for me because I know that a lot of history is left out in lessons, and sometimes even social studies itself is taken out of the curriculum because schools don't have room to teach that. So what I want to do is to ensure not only my students are gaining access to this information, but they're getting the full view of every historical event that they possibly can, because it's not only one side of the story. You need to understand every perspective to be able to have a wider scope of what had happened in this time period, so that they have a better understanding and that specific events don't repeat itself in the future.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question from the chat, which is probably for Samantha. And if you don't remember, because as you noted, you were focused more on the property in your research. If you don't remember, I can answer. Any other properties by Abell that our audience might recognize?
Some quite prominent ones, actually, because I believe he did the Duke campus, like almost in its entirety, which is a pretty famously beautiful campus. And was it the Chicago Art Museum?
Philadelphia Museum of Art. Yep, he did Widener Memorial Library at Harvard University, Philadelphia Central Library. The thing is, it's tricky to determine what is an Abell building because the plans coming out of the Trumbauer firm were not signed. They just went out under the name of the Trumbauer firm. So now historians are going back and trying to kind of decode the style of workmanship, right? Unfortunately, neither Abell nor Trumbauer left their papers after they passed, right? So now historians are trying to untangle which were the Abell buildings, which are, Abell was famous for working in limestone. So that's one of the ways you kind of start determining if he was the lead designer or not. But many, many famous structures, probably, as Samantha definitely noted, most famously the Duke campus. And a lot, we're not the only one, at Monmouth trying to reassert our connection to Abell. A lot of these buildings, these organizations have been doing that of late. If you go out and Google it, you'll see.
I'm fairly sure the Duke campus named a quad the Julian Abell quad to sort of honor the architect that contributed so much to their campus.
Yes.
So it's definitely a national concerted effort to bring his legacy back into the light.
Yep. Good memory, Samantha. I have a comment in the chat for Carol. I just want you to know, Matt, she says, thank you, Matt. It's nice to see how much the oral history work has meant for you. Carol also wants to recognize both Jillian and Rowan on their past work for the Veterans Oral History Project. Dr. Blumel asked if there's ever overlap. They also in the past have done this work in my oral history class. Any other questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for sharing your work today, everybody. This is a question, especially for the oral historians, whether you're asking the questions or reading them, Matt. This is my question is about the productive question. When you've either conducted or read interviews with people, are there any particular questions that have stood out to you as being especially productive in terms of eliciting interesting memories? Or conversely, are there any questions that you're surprised that they're kind of duds and don't provoke more interesting responses?
I know from at least listening to my interviews, just because it's dealt with over different wars, you hear so many different stories and experiences. Professor Ziober always says, like, you can interview 10 different veterans from the same war and hear 10 different stories and think you've experienced 10 different wars. So that's always just an interesting aspect to it. But yeah, it's just amazing to the personal experiences everyone has is just truly incredible to see, like the differential.
Jillian, you want to hop in there too?
Yeah. So something Dr. Ziober said when she was teaching me how to do oral histories was that there's a difference between, you're going to get a different story if you interview someone immediately after an event takes place versus like at the end of their life or like separated from the particular event you're trying to talk to them about and hear their story from. So a lot of my interviews that have been conducted as in regards to the ongoing pandemic, like it's still happening. So some of the questions are a lot more difficult to solicit like a really deep answer because no one really knows what's going on. No one knows anything. So it's a little bit more difficult, but as Carol pointed out, I have worked on the veterans interviews and transcribing them like Matt has, and just going off that experience, it's a lot more, it's just a totally different experience when you have it so far, you have an interview so far after the fact. So I think that is a really big determining factor in the response that you get from your narrator.
Thank you, Jillian. Here's a question for all of our panelists from your fellow student, Kelly Prioli. She says, great job, everyone. I'd love to ask everyone this question. What is one of the most interesting facts you learned along the way from your project? I know sometimes in research, you hear the most intriguing things that don't always perfectly fit your story. Does anyone have a fun fact from their research or a funny story? Anybody want to volunteer there?
I didn't know much about Sojourner Truth other than like the A9 woman's speech and just her legacy in general of her being an abolitionist, but she apparently had an invitation to meet President Abraham Lincoln in 1864 for the work that she did. And I didn't know that like for an African-American woman during that time period to be invited to meet the president, that just like was amazing to me. And the fact that I never was taught that was like mind-boggling.
Thanks, Rowan. Anyone else? Samantha, go ahead.
Mine, since I did focus more on the grounds, is an interesting fact about what the space used to be used for before it was this college campus we have now. And one quote from The Twilight of Splendor, Chronicles of the Age of American Palaces by James T. Mayer, said that the grounds used to be used for a cattle barn with 12 stanchions, a poultry house, 2 palm houses, a bull pen, a ram pen, sheep pens, pheasant pens, rabbit hutches, an ice house, cottages for the dairyman, the greenhouse man, and the poultry man, and dog kennels for the police dogs that were turned loose on the grounds each night. And most strangely, there was an artificial lake in the middle of the grounds that was stocked with ducks, geese, and swans, and a little summer house was built on a small island in the middle of the artificial lake. I was like shocked. I was like, they built a moat around a summer house to get away from their house 40 yards away. That's fun.
Unrelated to our project, if anyone is actually on campus these days, there's a beautiful exhibit on Shadow Lawn over in the kind of Pollock Gallery area right now. If you're over there, I definitely recommend you go check that out. And they do mention Abell also. Either of the other students want to weigh in on that question?
Yeah, just like outside of my interviews, I work in the Bruce Springsteen archives, which happened to be, I happened to interview my boss, Eileen Chapman, as my first interview for this project. And I've been working with her since I was a freshman. So I've known her for a couple of years now, and just listening to her life story after knowing her for so long, it was just I was like, I don't even know you, and I like sit across from you every day. So I got to know a lot about her, and then as I like did other interviews, it was interesting to see all these people's different experiences with the same event, and how other people live, I guess.
Thanks, Dr. Mezzi. We're glad you could join us. Matt, did you want to add any last thoughts there?
It's not really a fact, but just like an observation I made. Just because I've watched the interviews of both Vietnam veterans and World War II veterans, just seeing the comparison of how Vietnam veterans react to being interviewed, and just the appreciation that you could see it in their voice, and just how happy they are to tell their story and have it be preserved. Because the recognition when they came home for some wasn't always the best. So I thought that was just an interesting aspect of it.
That is interesting, Matt. Okay, we have time for one more question. I know everybody's very, very busy at the end of the semester. Anybody have a last question? Okay. Well, then I think we will leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you to my wonderful, wonderful students for being so brave and putting yourself out in the public and doing this work, and for sharing it today on this panel. Thanks, everybody. Fly Hawks.